Hi, it's Angie from Canterbury Trails Farm. Today I'm going to show you a simple skill, sewing on a button. A lot of people assume that everybody knows how to sew on a button, but I have met many people throughout my life who did not know how to sew on a button. It means that nobody ever taught them how to sew on a button. When I was in college, I, by accident, learned that people didn't know how to do these things that I took for granted, because I started sewing on buttons around kindergarten, a little bit before maybe. It was one of my first sewing tasks was to sew on the buttons. It was an easy skill to teach to other people because I knew I had mastered it at 4 or 5, so if I could do it then grown-up people, or mostly grown-up people in college, could do it then. I was able to make enough money to pay for food and some other small necessities while I was in college by doing simple mending. I put up little signs around campus, we'll sew on buttons or hem pants and that kind of stuff. So that's an idea for any girls or guys out there that know how to sew and are at college. You might be able to make, I charge $1 to sew on a button, so it doesn't seem like a lot, but you can get a cheeseburger for $1, so those meals add up fast. So the first thing we need to do is let's look at I have a man's dress shirt here. If you're afraid that you're going to sew the button on in the wrong place, the first thing I would do would be to button all your buttons. That way you can see where you need to sew. If you're lucky, your dress shirt is going to have an extra button or two sewn. Here's where the last button is. And that's the one we're going to be replacing. Either it's sewn down here towards the end, the hem of the shirt. Sometimes you will find it sewn, one or two, sewn onto the inside. Sometimes you'll find a fabric-like label with buttons sewn onto that, sewn on the inside. The higher end dress shirt that you buy usually has nicer ways of attaching it, and that's usually where you'll find the cotton. It's a soft fabric like label sewn in with the 1 or 2 buttons sewn onto that you can remove to replace your buttons with. So the first thing you need to do is find a seam ripper, and if you don't have a seam ripper, you could use like nail scissors, very small sewing scissors of some sort, or personal grooming scissors. And you're just going to slide it up underneath this stitch here, and you want to pop that seam so you can remove that button. And then you're going to remove the stitches that they put in. Now, if you don't have a button attached to your shirt, or you've already used that button and also lost that one, then you need to find a button as close to the buttons on the shirt as possible. You might find that on another shirt that you have, or maybe something you've thrown out in the donate box, or you can go to Walmart or a fabric store and get replacement buttons. Or you can also buy at like thrift stores used a shirt or something that has maybe similar buttons to it. So now, the first thing you want to do on your shirt is look closely and see if you can see either the indentation of where the button used to be, or holes where the button used to be sewn. I can see both here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I can see a slight impression of a round circle where the button used to be, and I can see 2 indentions in my fabric and small holes where the stitches used to be. This is going to give you a good guideline. If you don't have that, then you need to button all your buttons, line up your shirt, and either mark it on there with a pencil or something very slight that will come off, a little piece of chalk. And once you've found, you need to find thread that matches as close as possible. I had a hard time with this shirt. I couldn't decide if it was dark gray or black. So I finally went with black, but if you don't have the color that it looks like it is, then you want to try to stick to a neutral, a navy blue, a brown, a gray, or a black, or a white, whatever's the closest that blends in with your fabric. I have 4 holes in my button. So there are 2 ways you can do this. I can sew it in an X, or I can sew it in 2 loops. The best way to do it is look at the shirt and see what has already been done. This shirt has been sewn in an X, so I'm going to sew this in an X. I've brought my needle and thread up through the original hole that I saw on the shirt, and now my thread is on the top of the shirt. I'm just going to put any one of the holes, doesn't matter, over my needle and get it to the fabric here. Try to turn your button in whatever direction the other buttons have been sewn. Where did I come up? Now just, we're doing an X. Just want to bring your needle and thread through the fabric, back down through another hole. It's just sort of a hit and miss, poking it back there until you hit the hole. And if you haven't done this before, you might be poking around back there for a while, and you might poke yourself a few times too. I'd say do it 4 or 5 times just to make sure it's secure. Here's another tip. If you have something, a shank button is one that doesn't have holes. It has a little loop on the back. A shank button, or a button that's sewn with white thread. And especially on men's coats and actual coats, you can use white dental floss to replace the thread with. You can also, if you have a colored situation, you can use 2 pieces of colored thread with the white dental floss to sort of camouflage that whiteness, and use that to sew your button on with, and you will be amazed at how durable it is. You can't really break that dental floss hardly at all, and that's really good for something that gets a lot of high traffic, like a flap on a pocket, or a coat button that gets a lot of hard wear to it. So there we have it, and now I'm just going to button my shirt to double check that it's where it needs to be, and it's on. So if you were not doing the X, if you were doing the loop, you would just go up and down, up and through, up and through, up, down through, around one, and then you would do the other one. So you would have 2 separate loops instead of the cross. So just look at your shirt to see which one. It's not difficult. Just sew it until it feels secure. I'd say about 4 or 5, like each X 4 or 5 times. I use double thread. You thread it and then you tie a knot in it so it's doubled. You can also buy, if you're buying something specifically for it, you can buy button thread. Button thread is a thicker thread that, I'm totally Chuck Schumerine things here. Button thread is a thicker thread that is used for sewing on buttons. You can use it for other things too, but it's sort of a double strength button thread. Even when I use button thread, I tend to double things. I just want to make sure when I put it on, it stays on. While you're sewing on a loose button, go ahead and check your other buttons too. And see, you're already doing it. You might as well check all those other buttons, and if there's another loose one, go ahead and fix that one too. Save yourself some time in the future. So that's an easy way to sew on a button. It doesn't have to be really difficult. A lot of people, I think, are a little, when anything involving sewing, they get a little anxious because they don't know how to do it. But just probably the hardest part is poking it through that needle, threading that needle, and then finding the holes in your button. And that's okay. You'll get better. So that's how to sew on a button, and I hope that helped somebody. So this has been Angie for Canterbury Trails Farm. Bye.